A few years back, I lived with my friend Kyle in a rental house in Gastonia, North Carolina, a small city outside Charlotte. The rent was cheap, which was perfect for us since we were both working part-time retail jobs and trying to save money. Kyle and I had known each other since high school and figured rooming together would be easy enough. The neighborhood wasn't great. A lot of the houses looked run down, and several appeared to be vacant. The place directly behind ours, separated by a chain-link fence and about 30 feet of weeds, was definitely abandoned. It was a single-story ranch house with boarded-up windows and a collapsed section of roof on one side. The yard was completely overgrown with waist-high grass and some kind of thorny vines covering most of the back wall. Our next-door neighbors to the left seemed sketchy and kept to themselves. To the right was a woman named Carol who lived alone. Carol was probably in her 50s, thin, with short blonde hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in a while. The first time we met her, the day we moved in, Carol came over and introduced herself. Her voice was quiet, and she kept looking past us toward the abandoned house in the back. When Kyle asked how long the place had been empty, Carol said it had been vacant since before anyone on the street could remember. Then Carol asked if we'd seen anyone back there. We said no, and asked why. Carol just shook her head and went back to her house. About a week after we moved in, I was in our backyard late one evening having a beer. It was around 9:30 p.m., and the sun had just gone down. I was sitting in a lawn chair facing the abandoned house when I noticed something. One of the boards covering a window on the side of the house was missing. I'd walked past that same side a few days earlier to throw out trash, and I was pretty sure the board had been there then. I went inside and told Kyle. He came out to look and agreed the board was gone. We stood there staring at the dark window opening. Kyle said maybe some kids had pulled it off. I said maybe. The next night I was in the kitchen around 10 p.m., making a sandwich when I looked out the window toward the abandoned house. I saw a light. It was faint, like a flashlight or candle, moving past one of the windows on the far side. I called Kyle over and we both watched. The light moved from one window to another, then disappeared. Kyle wanted to call the police, but I talked him out of it. I said it could be someone homeless looking for a place to crash, and we'd feel bad getting them arrested. Kyle wasn't convinced but agreed to wait. 2 days later, I saw Carol in her driveway and asked if she'd noticed anything strange with the abandoned house. Carol's face went pale. Carol asked why I was asking. I told her about the missing board and the light we'd seen. She grabbed my arm and said we needed to stay away from that house, that someone had been living back there for months and that person wasn't right. I asked what that meant, and Carol said the person came out at night sometimes and stood in our shared yard, just watching the houses. Carol had called the police twice, but by the time they arrived, the person was always gone. That night, Kyle and I were in the living room watching TV when we heard something in our backyard. It sounded like footsteps on the gravel near our back fence. Kyle muted the TV and we listened. The footsteps stopped. Then we heard the chain-link fence rattle like someone was climbing over it. We both went to the back door and turned on the porch light. The yard was empty, but the fence was still shaking slightly. Kyle grabbed a baseball bat from the hall closet and opened the door. We stepped outside and looked around. Nothing. Then I saw movement near the side of our house. Someone was standing there in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the porch light. Hey, Kyle yelled. Get the fuck out of here. The person didn't move. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark silhouette. We stood there in silence for what felt like a full minute. Then the person turned and walked toward the fence and climbed over it and disappeared into the overgrown yard of the abandoned house. Kyle and I went back inside and locked the door. We were both shaken. Kyle wanted to call the police, but I said the same thing Carol had told me. By the time they got here, the person would be gone. We decided to call them anyway. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later. We explained what happened, and they walked around our yard with flashlights, then checked the fence line. One of them went to knock on Carol's door, but Carol didn't answer, even though we could see the TV on inside. The officers said they'd do a sweep of the abandoned property, but they couldn't enter without cause. They left and we didn't hear anything back. The next day we saw Carol outside. Carol looked terrible, like she hadn't slept. She told us the person had been at her window last night, standing in her backyard staring into her house. Carol was moving out, staying with a sister in another town. She left that afternoon. Kyle and I lasted 3 more days. We barely slept. Every sound outside made us jump. On the 3rd night I was lying in bed and heard something scraping against the side of the house right outside my window. I didn't get up to look. I stayed in bed with my heart pounding until morning. We told our landlord we were breaking the lease. He wasn't happy, but we didn't care. We moved our stuff out over 2 days and found a place closer to Charlotte. The rent was higher, but neither of us cared. We drove away from that house and didn't talk about it for months. I still think about whoever was living in that abandoned house and what they were doing out there at night. There was a house in my neighborhood in Greenville that had been sitting empty for about 3 years. It was a foreclosure from the housing crash and nobody ever bought it. The bank just left it sitting there. The lawn was completely dead and brown. There were newspapers piled up by the front door, and one of the garage doors was halfway open and stuck like that. Most of the houses on the street were fine, normal suburban homes, but this one stuck out like a sore thumb. We called it the bank house. One Friday night, my friends Aaron, Mitch, and I were hanging out with nothing to do. We'd just gotten food from Taco Bell and were sitting in Aaron's car trying to figure out what to do next. Mitch brought up the bank house and said we should go check it out. Actually, go inside and look around. Aaron and I were both down for it. We were all around 19 at the time and stupid enough to think it was a good idea. We drove over and parked across the street. It was around 11 p.m., and most of the houses on the block had their lights off already. The bank house was completely dark. We got out and walked up the driveway and trying to be quiet, but also not really caring that much. The neighborhood was dead. The front door was locked. We walked around to the side and tried a window, but it wouldn't budge. Then we went to the back and found the sliding glass door. Mitch pulled on it and it slid right open. No lock. No resistance, nothing. We all looked at each other, like this was almost too easy. The inside of the house smelled stale and musty, like old carpet and mildew. We used our phone flashlights to see. The place was mostly empty, but there was some furniture left behind. A couch in the living room, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, some shelves. It looked like whoever lived there before just left in a hurry and took only what they could carry. We split up to check out different rooms. I went down the hallway toward the bedrooms. The first room was completely empty, except for some boxes stacked in the corner near. I opened one and it was full of old clothes. The second bedroom had a mattress on the floor with no sheets, just the bare mattress. There were stains on it that I didn't want to look at too closely. I heard Aaron call out from somewhere in the house saying he found something weird. I walked back toward the living room and found him standing in the kitchen pointing at the counter. There were like 10 or 15 empty cans of soup lined up in a perfect row. Campbell's chicken noodle, tomato, vegetable. All of them had been opened with a can opener and were completely empty. Next to the sink was a single spoon. Mitch came in from the garage and said there was a sleeping bag out there and a lantern. We all kind of looked at each other realizing the same thing. Someone had been staying here. Maybe still was. Aaron said we should leave, but Mitch wanted to check upstairs first. The house had a second floor that we hadn't been to yet. I agreed with Mitch because we'd already come this far. Aaron reluctantly followed us. The stairs creaked as we went up. The second floor had 3 rooms and a bathroom. The first room was empty. The second room had more boxes and what looked like a pile of blankets in the corner. The third room's door was closed. Mitch reached for the handle and opened it. The room had a dresser, a folding chair, and clothes hanging from a rod that was mounted between 2 walls. There was also a battery-powered camping light sitting on the dresser, turned off. But what made us all freeze was the smell. It was bad, like garbage and sweat and something else I couldn't identify. Then we heard a toilet flush. It came from the bathroom down the hall. We all turned toward the sound. The bathroom door opened and a man walked out. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a dirty jacket and jeans. He saw us immediately and stopped. Nobody said anything for a second. Then the man yelled, "What the fuck are you doing in my house?" We didn't wait to explain or argue. Mitch turned and ran for the stairs. Aaron and I were right behind him. I could hear the man behind us yelling something, but I wasn't listening. We got down the stairs and ran through the living room toward the back door. As we were running out, I saw someone else. There was another person sitting on the couch in the living room. I don't know how we missed them before. It was too dark to see details, but they were just sitting there watching us run past. We got outside and sprinted across the backyard to the front. We didn't stop until we were in Aaron's car. He started it and we drove off. Once we were a few blocks away, we all started talking at once, trying to figure out what just happened. Mitch said there were definitely at least 2 people living in that house. Aaron said maybe more. I brought up the person on the couch and how they didn't move or say anything, just sat there. That creeped Aaron out even more. We debated calling the police, but ultimately decided against it. We didn't want to get in trouble for breaking and entering. And honestly, the people living there weren't really hurting anyone. They were just squatting in a bank-owned house that nobody cared about. I drove by the bank house a few weeks later during the day and saw that the sliding glass door had been boarded up. I don't know if the bank finally did something about it or if the people inside secured it themselves. The house sat there for another year before it finally sold. I have no idea what happened to whoever was living there, or if they moved on to another empty house. I still think about the person sitting on that couch in the dark, not moving, just watching us run. That image stuck with me more than anything else from that night. I grew up in a rural part of Eastern Oregon, the kind of place where houses are spread far apart, and you have to drive 20 minutes just to get to a gas station. It's flat, quiet, and most people who live there have been there their whole lives. Not exactly the kind of place where you'd expect to run into real danger. But I learned that assumption was wrong. This happened about 4 years ago when I was 17. My friend Ethan and I were both into photography at the time, or at least we pretended to be. We'd drive around with our cameras looking for interesting things to shoot, which in our area usually meant old barns, rusted tractors, or abandoned buildings. There were quite a few of those scattered around the farmland outside town. We'd heard about an old farmhouse about 15 miles north of where we lived. It had been abandoned for at least a decade, maybe longer. The property was huge, probably 100 acres of overgrown fields, and a few collapsed outbuildings surrounding the main house. The house itself was a 2-story structure with faded white paint and a sagging front porch. Ethan and I decided it would be perfect for the kind of moody, atmospheric shots we were going for. We drove out there on a Saturday afternoon in July. The summer heat was brutal, and the dirt road leading to the property kicked up clouds of dust behind Ethan's truck. We parked at the end of the driveway, which was barely visible through the tall weeds. The farmhouse sat about 100 yards from the road, surrounded by dead grass and a few skeletal trees. The front door was locked, but one of the ground floor windows had a broken pane. Ethan reached through and unlocked it from the inside. Then we both climbed in. The house smelled like dust and old wood. The first floor had a living room, kitchen, and a small bathroom. Most of the furniture was still there. A moth-eaten couch, a wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with old canning jars. Everything was covered in a thick layer of grime. We spent maybe an hour taking photos. Ethan was focused on the peeling wallpaper and the way light came through the broken windows. I was more interested in the small details: the jars, an old rotary phone still mounted on the kitchen wall, a calendar from 1998 hanging in the hallway. Then we went upstairs. One of the bedroom had a mattress on the floor with a sleeping bag on top of it. The sleeping bag looked relatively new, not covered in dust like everything else. Next to the mattress was a plastic water bottle, half full, and a flashlight. Ethan went quiet, and I felt my stomach sink. Whoever left this stuff here was coming back for it. We checked the other rooms more carefully after that. In the bathroom, we found a backpack hanging on the door hook. Inside were clothes, a toothbrush, some canned food, and a kitchen knife wrapped in a towel. We also found something else. A small bag of what looked like pills or maybe drugs. I didn't touch it. Ethan said we should leave. I agreed. We went back downstairs and climbed out the window we'd come through. As we were walking back to the truck, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt near one of the collapsed outbuildings, and the grass around it had been flattened recently, like a vehicle had been parked there. We got in the truck and left. On the drive back, Ethan and I talked about what we'd found. We figured someone was either squatting there or using the place to store something they didn't want found. Either way, it wasn't our problem, and we decided to just forget about it. But 2 days later, Ethan texted me saying he'd left his good camera lens in the farmhouse. He'd set it down in one of the upstairs rooms while adjusting his tripod, and completely forgot to grab it when we left. The lens was expensive, a gift from his dad, and he was panicking about losing it. He asked if I'd go back with him to get it. I told him it was a bad idea, but he kept insisting. He said we'd go during the day again, be in and out in 5 minutes, and whoever was staying there probably wasn't even around. I eventually agreed. We drove out there the next afternoon. When we pulled up to the property, I immediately felt uneasy. There was a car parked near the house that hadn't been there before, a beat-up sedan with a tarp partially covering it. Ethan saw it too, but said we'd already driven all the way out there, and he really needed that lens. We approached the house quietly. The window we'd used before was now closed. Ethan tried it, but it wouldn't open. Someone had locked it from the inside. We walked around to the back and found the back door slightly open. Ethan pushed it open further and we stepped inside. The kitchen looked different. There were more items on the counter now. A propane camping stove, several boxes of cold medicine, empty bottles of drain cleaner, and coffee filters. I didn't know much about drugs, but I'd seen enough news reports to recognize what we were looking at. This was a meth lab, or the supplies for one. I grabbed Ethan's arm and whispered that we needed to leave immediately. He nodded, but as we turned to go back out the door, we heard voices outside. 2 men were talking, walking toward the back of the house. We moved quickly and quietly toward the front. The voices got closer. I heard the back door open fully and footsteps entering the kitchen. One of the men said something about needing to move everything by tonight. Ethan and I made it to the front door. It was locked from the inside with a deadbolt. I unlocked it as quietly as possible, and we slipped outside. We didn't run. That would have made too much noise, but we walked as fast as we could toward the truck. We were maybe 50 feet from the vehicle when we heard shouting behind us. Someone had seen us through a window. The back door slammed open, and I heard running footsteps. We ran. Ethan got to the truck first and had it started by the time I jumped in. He threw it in reverse and floored it, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. I looked back and saw 2 men standing in the driveway. One of them was holding something, but I couldn't tell what it was through the dust. Ethan didn't slow down until we hit the main highway. We were both shaking. We drove straight to the sheriff's office and reported what we'd seen. The deputy took our information and said they'd check it out. We found out later that week that they'd raided the property and arrested 3 people. They'd been manufacturing methamphetamine and using the remote location to avoid detection. Ethan never got his camera lens back. It was seized as evidence, or maybe the people there had already gotten rid of it. He didn't care though. Neither of us ever went back to explore abandoned buildings after that.